David Bennett.
I move that the question be now put.
Mr. Chairman.
David Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to deal with the issue as to what it is that's standing between borrowers and repayments. I was on the select committee that heard submissions on this bill, and we heard from a former official of the Inland Revenue Department who had, when she was with the department, responsibilities which included the recovery of student loans. And she informed the committee that whilst it's appropriate that we have a contact person for a student loan other than the borrower, normally their parents, I don't think anyone in this House disagrees with that being a sensible thing to do. In her opinion, she didn't think this was going to make much difference to repayments, because the reality is that of the vast majority of the outstanding balance of overseas-based student loan borrowers relates to interest and penalties. And once interest and penalties reach a certain point and interest compounds every interest period, the amount that is accruing due to the Crown grows at such a rate that the borrower feels helpless and hopeless. They think that this has become such an insurmountable problem, they choose to ignore it because they don't see any meaningful way that they can get their loan under control. And so her evidence to the Select Committee was that this problem of outstanding overseas student loan amounts is not going to be properly dealt with until we come to some way of dealing with some of these very significant arrears that we have on some of these older balances. This was also the experience that we had for New Zealand-based student loan borrowers when New Zealanders were borrowing and paying interest whilst they were at university and then interest during the period of repayment. We also had quite a number of borrowers who became so behind that they just gave up and they didn't even make an attempt to repay the principal or the interest because they just couldn't get ahead. That's the problem that we have here. So, Mr. Chairman, I would invite the Speaker, the Minister and the Chair to take a call and respond to this issue as to whether this is in fact the case. I would suggest it is, because the evidence that we had from the department was that the effect of these measures on student loan repayments, and Mr. Clark might be able to help me with supplying a figure here, the amount that this is anticipated reducing overseas student loans is...
Well, the repayment holiday is $5 billion.
So it gains $12 billion owed in total on student loans, and the proportion of those that are overseas is substantial, and this improves collections by decreasing the holiday period from 3 to 1 years. It increases collections by an estimated $5 million.
The Treasury and Ministry of Education think it will actually have the opposite effect.
Yeah, and so the Treasury, you know, it's a good point. David Clark was on the committee as well, and he interjects by making the fair point that indeed the Ministry of Education think that rather than encouraging more repayments, this is going to make it worse because more student borrowers will be getting into trouble earlier. I'm not sure that I'm completely convinced by that argument, because I do think that if you have a lengthy holiday period, then you're more likely to get used to not repaying it. And I think there is some benefit in letting people know what the real event is slightly earlier, but I don't think it's going to collect these old debtors who aren't paying because their interest bills and their penalties have become so high and they compound every interest period that they just can't get on top of the problem. So for the government to present this as a substantial cure to outstanding indebtedness on overseas loans, their own analysis shows that that's not true, and therefore this is but tinkering at the edges. And until the government is willing to grasp the nettle and actually do something with these long outstanding balances and the accrued interest and penalties that are the major part of the debt now, they're not going to get on top of the problem. And to the extent that the government includes these receivables in their financial statements at probably a higher value than is truly recoverable, then they're misrepresenting the position to themselves. Now, I know that they make an allowance for uncollectible debt, but I suspect in respect of these international debts, that allowance for uncollectible debts is too low. So, Mr. Chairman, I would ask the Minister to respond as to whether the underlying problem is, for a lot of these old debtors, the fact that interest is accruing to such a degree they can't get on top of it.
Simon O'Connor.
I move that the question be now put.